The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Kensington Palace as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood at her office window, watching the groundskeepers tend to the roses. She had always found comfort in these quiet moments before the day's responsibilities began. Her private secretary knocked gently on the door, carrying a stack of correspondence that had arrived, overnight from across Britain. Among the usual official documents was something different, a collection of letters that would soon change how the royal couple approached their public duties. These weren't formal invitations or government briefings, but heartfelt messages from ordinary people sharing their stories of hope, resilience, and community spirit during challenging times. Catherine carefully opened the first letter, written in shaky handwriting by an elderly woman from Yorkshire. The letter described how she had started a small neighborhood tea group to help lonely residents connect with each other. The woman mentioned how seeing Prince William and Catherine's genuine care for people had inspired her to reach out to others in her community. As Catherine read through more letters, a pattern emerged. People weren't asking for anything from the royal family. Instead, they were sharing how small acts of kindness in their communities were making real differences in people's lives. A teacher in Scotland had organized reading sessions for struggling students. A young man in Wales had begun delivering groceries to elderly neighbors. A group of teenagers in London had created a support network for their peers dealing with anxiety. Prince William entered the office, fresh from his morning run around the palace grounds. He noticed the thoughtful expression on his wife's face as she continued reading through the correspondence. Catherine looked up at him with eyes that sparkled with an idea forming in her mind. She handed him one of the letters, watching as his expression softened while reading about a father who had started coaching youth football to help children in his area stay active and build confidence. William had always believed in the power of sports to bring communities together, and this letter resonated deeply with his own experiences working with young people. The couple spent the next hour reading through dozens of similar stories. Each letter painted a picture of ordinary British citizens doing extraordinary things for their neighbors and communities. These weren't grand gestures that made headlines, but simple acts of human kindness that were creating ripples of positive change across the country. Catherine suggested they should find a way to celebrate these unsung heroes. William agreed immediately, remembering how his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had always emphasized the importance of recognizing the good work happening in communities throughout Britain. They began discussing how they could use their platform to shine a light on these inspiring individuals. Their conversation was interrupted by their communications team arriving for the weekly planning meeting. As William and Catherine shared the morning's discovery with their staff, the room buzzed with excitement about the possibilities. Someone suggested organizing visits to meet these community champions in person. Another team member proposed creating a way for more people to share their stories of local kindness. The head of communications pointed out that this could be exactly what the country needed during a time when news cycles were often dominated by division and negativity. Highlighting genuine human connections and community spirit could remind people of the values that bind British society together. By the end of the meeting, the foundation of what would become a nationwide celebration of community heroes had been established. Catherine and William would personally visit several of the letter writers, bringing attention to their work and encouraging others to follow their example. The palace would also create a platform for more people to share their own stories of neighborhood kindness. As the team dispersed to begin planning, Catherine returned to the window overlooking the gardens. She thought about how these letters had arrived at exactly the right moment, when both she and William had been looking for ways to make their royal duties feel more personally meaningful and directly connected to people's daily lives. The afternoon brought a call from their media relations team, who had already begun reaching out to local news outlets in the areas where they planned to visit. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with journalists eager to share these uplifting stories with their audiences. That evening, as William and Catherine reviewed the day's developments over dinner, they felt a renewed sense of purpose in their roles. They had always wanted their work to celebrate the best of British society, and these letters had shown them a path forward that felt authentic and impactful. Catherine carefully placed the original letters in a special folder, knowing they would become the foundation documents for what promised to be one of their most meaningful royal initiatives. The genuine warmth and hope expressed in those handwritten pages had already begun to transform how they thought about connecting with the people they served. 3 weeks after discovering the inspiring letters, Prince William and Catherine stepped out of their official car onto a quiet street in a small Yorkshire village. The autumn air was crisp, and golden leaves danced in the breeze as they walked toward a modest community center where Margaret Thompson, the elderly woman who had written the first letter, was waiting nervously inside. Margaret had been organizing her weekly tea gatherings for over 2 years, but she never imagined that her simple letter to the palace would result in a royal visit. She had spent the entire morning arranging chairs in a perfect circle and ensuring there were enough homemade biscuits for everyone, including the unexpected royal guests. When William and Catherine entered the community center, they were greeted by the sight of 15 local residents ranging in age from 30 to 90, all chatting animatedly around tables laden with teapots and plates of treats. The nervous energy in the room was palpable, but it quickly dissolved when Catherine approached Margaret with a warm smile and genuine enthusiasm. Margaret, despite her initial nervousness, found herself speaking naturally with Catherine about how the tea group had evolved from a simple idea into something that had genuinely transformed the social fabric of their small community. She explained how Mrs. Jenkins, who had been isolated after her husband's death, now looked forward to these gatherings all week. She pointed to Mr. Davis, a retired teacher who had been struggling with loneliness, and described how he had become the group's unofficial historian, sharing fascinating stories about the village's past. William moved from table to table, engaging with each person individually. He listened intently as Mrs. Foster explained how the group had expanded beyond weekly teas to include walking groups, garden sharing initiatives, and even a small lending library. The genuine interest he showed in their activities made everyone feel that their efforts were truly valued and important. One particularly touching moment occurred when young Tommy, Margaret's 8-year-old great-grandson, shyly approached Catherine. He had been helping his great-grandmother set up for the gatherings and had become something of a mascot for the group. Tommy presented Catherine with a hand-drawn picture showing people sitting around tables with big smiles on their faces. Catherine knelt down to his level, accepting the drawing with visible emotion and promising to display it prominently in her office. The royal couple spent nearly 2 hours at the community center, far longer than originally scheduled. They participated in the tea service, helped wash dishes, and even joined in a spirited discussion about the best locations for the group's upcoming winter meetings. Catherine was particularly moved when Margaret quietly mentioned that 3 marriages had resulted from friendships formed at these gatherings, and 2 elderly residents had found the courage to seek medical help for conditions they had been ignoring. As they prepared to leave, William addressed the entire group, speaking from the heart about how impressed he and Catherine were with what they had accomplished. He emphasized that their work represented the very best of British community spirit and that their example would inspire similar initiatives across the country. Margaret presented Catherine with a handwritten recipe book compiled by all the group members, featuring their favorite tea time treats along with personal notes about why each recipe was special to them. Catherine clutched the book close to her chest, visibly touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. The local media had gathered outside the community center, and several group members agreed to brief interviews about their experiences. Mrs. Jenkins, who had initially been too shy to speak with the royal visitors, found herself confidently explaining to reporters how the tea group had given her a new lease on life after years of isolation. During the drive back to London, William and Catherine discussed how natural and comfortable the entire visit had felt. Unlike many of their formal engagements, this had felt like spending time with extended family members. Catherine mentioned that she had already started thinking about ways to incorporate similar community-focused visits into their regular schedule. Their private secretary, who had accompanied them on the visit, noted that the local coverage of the event was overwhelmingly positive. The story was being picked up by national media outlets, and social media was buzzing with comments from people who wanted to start similar initiatives in their own communities. That evening, Catherine carefully placed Tommy's drawing in a frame on her desk, positioning it where she would see it every morning when she arrived at her office. The simple crayon sketch served as a daily reminder of the real impact that royal attention could have on celebrating and encouraging community-building efforts. Margaret's recipe book found a place of honor in Catherine's personal collection, and she made a mental note to try some of the recipes during upcoming family gatherings. The personal touches from the Yorkshire visit had created lasting connections that went far beyond the formal aspects of royal duty. Word of the successful visit quickly spread through royal circles, with other members of the family expressing interest in similar community-focused engagements. The Yorkshire Tea Group had unknowingly become the model for a new approach to royal public service that prioritized authentic human connections over formal ceremonies. The response to the Yorkshire visit exceeded everyone's expectations. Within days of the news coverage, Kensington Palace began receiving hundreds of new letters from communities across Britain. People were sharing their own stories of local kindness and asking how they could start similar initiatives in their neighborhoods. Catherine found herself spending early mornings reading through these new submissions while enjoying her coffee in the palace's private breakfast room. Each letter revealed another layer of the quiet heroism happening in British communities. A librarian in Edinburgh had created reading partnerships between elderly residents and struggling young readers. A group of mothers in Birmingham had organized childcare exchanges that allowed single parents to pursue education and job training. The communications team had to establish a dedicated system for managing the influx of correspondence. They created categories for different types of community initiatives, mapping out potential future visits and identifying stories that could inspire others. The response had grown so large that additional staff members were assigned to help process and respond to every letter personally. William was particularly drawn to a letter from James Morrison, a former soldier who had struggled with adjustment after leaving the military. James had channeled his challenges into creating a mentorship program for other veterans in his Liverpool community. The program paired experienced veterans with those newly transitioning to civilian life, providing practical support with everything from job applications to navigating social situations. The royal couple decided that James's program would be their second community visit. When they arrived in Liverpool on a grey November morning, they found a bustling community center filled with veterans of all ages working together on various projects. Some were helping each other practice job interview skills, while others collaborated on small business plans or simply shared stories over cups of tea. James, a soft-spoken man in his early 30s, explained how the program had grown from informal conversations in local pubs to a structured support network that had helped dozens of veterans find their footing in civilian life. He introduced William and Catherine to Derek, a veteran of the Falklands War who had become a mentor to younger veterans, and to Sarah, one of the few female participants who had used the program's support to start her own catering business. Catherine was moved by Sarah's story of how the group had rallied around her business idea, helping her develop a business plan and providing emotional support during difficult moments. Sarah had since hired 2 other veterans, creating a small success story that had rippled out to benefit multiple families. William spent considerable time speaking with the younger veterans about their experiences transitioning from military to civilian life. His own military background helped him connect with their challenges in a personal way, and several participants later commented that they felt truly understood during their conversations with the prince. The Liverpool visit lasted almost 3 hours, with William and Catherine participating in group activities and even helping prepare lunch for everyone present. They listened to stories of struggle and triumph, learning about the creative ways the veterans had found to support each other through difficult transitions. During lunch, James quietly pulled Catherine aside to share that suicide rates among veterans in their area had decreased significantly since the program began. The simple act of knowing that someone understood their struggles and was available to help had made a life-saving difference for several participants. As news of the Liverpool visit spread, veterans organizations across the country began reaching out to James for advice on starting similar programs. The palace facilitated these connections, using their platform to help successful community initiatives spread to new areas. The media coverage of both visits began attracting attention from unexpected quarters. Corporate sponsors offered to support community programs that received royal recognition. Local councils started allocating small budgets to encourage neighborhood initiatives. Universities began studying the programs as examples of effective grassroots community building. Catherine and William realized they had accidentally created something much larger than they had initially envisioned. What had started as a simple desire to recognize good work in communities was becoming a movement that encouraged people across Britain to look for ways to help their neighbors. The palace began receiving requests from international media wanting to cover this new approach to royal engagement. News outlets from other countries were interested in how the British royal family was highlighting community volunteers, rather than focusing solely on official ceremonies and state functions. Back at Kensington Palace, the couple's children became interested in the community stories their parents shared at dinner. Prince George asked thoughtful questions about how young people could help in their communities, while Princess Charlotte suggested they could organize a toy drive for children whose families were struggling. The genuine enthusiasm from their own children reinforced William and Catherine's belief that they were onto something important. They were modeling for the next generation of royals how public service could be deeply connected to understanding and supporting the real challenges and triumphs of ordinary people. Planning began for the third visit, with the team carefully selecting a program that would showcase yet another aspect of community spirit. The momentum was building naturally, with each visit inspiring more people to share their stories and start their own neighborhood initiatives. Catherine kept a growing collection of thank you notes and photos from the visits, creating a personal archive of the connections they were making. Each item represented not just a successful royal engagement, but a genuine human relationship that had been formed through their shared commitment to strengthening communities across Britain. Not every aspect of the growing community initiative went smoothly. As winter settled over Britain, the palace team discovered that managing the enormous response was becoming increasingly complex. Some communities felt overlooked when they weren't selected for royal visits, despite having equally inspiring programs. Others worried that the sudden attention might change the organic nature of their grassroots efforts. Catherine found herself facing an unexpected dilemma when she received a heartbreaking letter from Emma Rodriguez, a single mother in Manchester who had started a food bank in her apartment building's common room. Emma's letter was different from the others because it arrived with a sense of urgency. She explained that her building's management company was threatening to shut down the food bank, claiming it violated lease agreements and created too much foot traffic. The situation presented a challenge that went beyond the feel-good nature of previous visits. This was a community program in crisis, and royal intervention might actually complicate rather than help the legal situation. William and Catherine spent hours discussing with their advisors how they could support Emma without overstepping boundaries or creating precedents that might cause problems. For other community initiatives, their legal team advised caution, suggesting that direct royal involvement in a landlord-tenant dispute could set difficult precedents. However, Catherine felt strongly that they couldn't ignore Emma's situation after encouraging people to reach out with their community stories. The emotional weight of potentially letting down someone who had trusted them with her struggles kept Catherine awake several nights. Meanwhile, the media attention surrounding the community visits had created unexpected pressures for some of the programs they had already visited. Margaret's tea group in Yorkshire was suddenly receiving visitors from other towns who wanted to observe their meetings. While Margaret appreciated the interest, she worried that the intimate, family-like atmosphere that made the group special was being disrupted by strangers with cameras and notebooks. James, in Liverpool, faced similar challenges when his veterans program received an overwhelming number of requests for interviews and documentary features. Several participants expressed discomfort with the media attention, feeling that their personal struggles were being turned into entertainment. James found himself spending more time managing media requests than focusing on the veterans who needed support. Catherine realized that success was creating its own set of problems. During a private meeting with William, she expressed concern that their good intentions might be inadvertently harming some of the very communities they were trying to celebrate. They needed to find ways to continue supporting these initiatives while protecting the grassroots authenticity that made them effective. The couple decided to take a more nuanced approach moving forward. They established clearer guidelines about media access during visits and created a buffer system that allowed community programs to maintain their privacy while still receiving recognition. They also began working with legal experts to provide discreet support for programs facing bureaucratic challenges, like Emma's food bank situation. For Emma's case specifically, they chose an indirect approach. Rather than making a public visit that might escalate tensions with the building management, Catherine arranged for a legal aid organization specializing in community rights to quietly reach out to Emma. The palace facilitated this connection without publicizing their involvement, allowing Emma to get professional help without the complications of royal media attention. The strategy worked better than anyone expected. The legal aid organization not only helped Emma navigate her lease issues, but also connected her with other tenant advocates who were dealing with similar situations across Manchester. Emma's food bank not only survived, but became part of a larger network of resident-led community services and apartment buildings throughout the city. William and Catherine learned valuable lessons about the responsibility that came with their platform. They realized that genuine support sometimes meant working behind the scenes rather than in the spotlight. This insight led them to establish a new protocol for handling community programs that needed assistance but might be harmed by public attention. The experience also deepened their appreciation for the community leaders they had met. People like Margaret and James were managing complex social dynamics while trying to help their neighbors, often without any formal training in program management or media relations. The challenges these leaders faced made their achievements even more impressive. During this difficult period, Catherine received an unexpected phone call from Margaret in Yorkshire. Instead of complaining about the disruptions to her tea group, Margaret called to thank Catherine for helping her realize how much her simple initiative had grown. She had decided to start training other people to facilitate similar groups, spreading the model more systematically while maintaining its personal touch. James called with similar news, explaining that despite the media challenges, 3 new veteran support programs had started in other cities using his model. He had developed a simple guide for starting such programs and was working with national veterans organizations to share it widely. These conversations reminded William and Catherine that the people they were working with were resilient and resourceful. Rather than being overwhelmed by the challenges success brought, these community leaders were adapting and finding ways to extend their impact while preserving what made their programs special. The couple realized that their role was evolving from simply recognizing good work to helping strong community leaders navigate the opportunities and challenges that recognition created. This required more sophisticated support systems and a deeper understanding of how grassroots organizations functioned. By the end of winter, they had developed a more sustainable approach that balanced public recognition with practical support, allowing community programs to benefit from royal attention without being overwhelmed by it. As spring arrived, William and Catherine's community initiative had evolved into something neither of them had originally envisioned. The palace announced the creation of the Community Champions Awards, an annual program that would formally recognize outstanding grassroots initiatives across Britain. Unlike traditional honors that focused on lifetime achievements, these awards would celebrate ongoing community work that was making immediate differences in people's daily lives. The announcement generated excitement throughout the country, but William and Catherine were careful to design the program based on everything they had learned during the challenging winter months. Rather than creating a competitive atmosphere, the awards would highlight diverse types of community work, ensuring that programs of all sizes and focuses could be recognized. Catherine worked closely with social policy experts to develop selection criteria that valued impact over publicity. They wanted to ensure that quiet, consistent community work would be valued alongside more visible initiatives. The application process was designed to be simple enough that volunteer-run programs could participate without requiring professional grant-writing skills. The first group of award recipients represented the breadth of community spirit they had discovered across Britain. Alongside Margaret's Tea Group and James's Veterans Program, the list included a teenage environmental group that had transformed vacant lots into community gardens, a book club that visited care homes to read with elderly residents, and a group of immigrant mothers who had created an informal childcare network that allowed them to attend English classes. Rather than hosting a single large ceremony in London, William and Catherine decided to present the awards during visits to each community. This approach allowed them to see the programs in action and meet the people whose lives had been touched by these initiatives. It also meant that the recognition would feel more personal and connected to the actual work being celebrated. Their first award presentation took them to a coastal town in Cornwall, where retired fisherman Robert Chen had organized a program teaching traditional fishing skills to young people. while also addressing marine conservation. Robert had grown concerned that both fishing, traditions and environmental awareness were being lost as young people moved away from coastal communities. When William and Catherine arrived at the small harbor where Robert conducted his classes, they found a group of teenagers working alongside experienced fishermen to repair nets and maintain boats. The program had evolved to include lessons about sustainable fishing practices, marine biology, and even basic business skills for those interested in continuing fishing careers. Robert, weathered and soft-spoken, explained that the program had helped several young people find direction in their lives while also creating bridges between generations in the community. Some participants had gone on to marine science programs at university, while others had chosen to stay and contribute to the local fishing industry with new knowledge about sustainable practices. Catherine was particularly moved when she met Lucy, a shy 16-year-old who had struggled academically until joining Robert's program. Lucy's confidence had blossomed as she discovered a passion for marine conservation, and she was now planning to study marine biology. She showed Catherine detailed sketches of local marine life that she had created during program field trips. William spent time learning traditional net mending techniques from Robert and the other experienced fishermen. The physical work provided a natural way to engage in conversations about the challenges facing coastal communities and the importance of passing on practical skills to new generations. The award presentation took place on the harbor pier at sunset, with the entire community gathered to celebrate Robert's work. Local families, program participants, and fishing crews all attended, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a community celebration than a formal royal event. When Catherine presented Robert with his award, she spoke about how his program exemplified the kind of community leadership that strengthened both traditions and future opportunities. Robert's quiet acceptance speech focused entirely on thanking the young people who had participated and the experienced fishermen who had shared their knowledge. The Cornwall visit received extensive media coverage, but the focus remained on Robert's work and its impact on the community rather than on the royal visitors. This balance felt right to William and Catherine, who had learned that the most meaningful recognition elevated the community workers rather than the recognizers. Following the Cornwall presentation, similar events took place across Britain throughout the spring and summer. Each visit revealed new aspects of community resilience and creativity. In Newcastle, they met a group of retired teachers who had created homework clubs in areas where many children lacked quiet study spaces at home. In Cardiff, they visited a program where elderly residents taught traditional crafts to young people while learning digital skills in return. The cumulative effect of these visits was profound, both for the royal couple and for the communities they visited. William and Catherine began to see patterns in what made community programs successful, regardless of their specific focus. Strong programs typically had passionate leaders who understood their communities deeply, clear but flexible goals, and ways to involve participants as partners rather than just beneficiaries. These insights influenced how the palace approached supporting community initiatives. They began providing small grants for programs that needed basic resources, facilitated connections between similar programs in different areas, and created simple toolkits that successful initiatives could use to help others start similar work. The Community Champions Awards had become more than an annual recognition program. They had evolved into a year-round system for identifying, supporting, and connecting grassroots initiatives across Britain. The palace had essentially created a national network for community volunteers, providing resources and recognition without imposing central control over local programs. As the first year of the program drew to a close, William and Catherine reflected on how much they had learned about effective community support. They had discovered that their role was most valuable when it helped amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard, and when it connected people who were doing similar work in isolation from each other. 1 year after reading that first letter from Margaret Thompson, Catherine stood once again at her office window, but this time she was looking out at a very different scene. The Palace Gardens hosted a special reception for all the Community Champions Award recipients, their families, and representatives from hundreds of programs that had been inspired by the initiative. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Margaret was there, but she was no longer the nervous letter writer who had hesitantly shared her tea group story. She had become a confident community organizer who was helping establish similar programs across Yorkshire and beyond. She brought with her Mrs. Jenkins, who had evolved from an isolated widow into a volunteer coordinator, helping other elderly residents connect with community resources. James stood near the refreshment table, deep in conversation with Robert from Cornwall and several other award recipients. They were comparing notes about program management challenges and sharing strategies that had worked in their different communities. The veteran's mentor had become an informal advisor to community programs across the country, helping groups navigate growth and media attention. Catherine moved through the reception, greeting old friends and meeting new faces. She stopped to chat with Emma, whose food bank had not only survived its legal challenges but had expanded into a comprehensive community resource center, serving 3 apartment buildings in Manchester. Emma was now working with local government officials to develop policies that would make it easier for residents to organize mutual aid programs. The children who attended the reception with their families gravitated toward Prince George and Princess Charlotte, creating an impromptu play area near the garden fountain. Catherine watched her own children naturally engage with young people from very different backgrounds, reinforcing her belief that community connection was something that could be learned and valued from an early age. William found himself in an animated discussion with a group of teenagers who had started environmental programs in their schools after being inspired by the community champions' stories. These young people were sharing ideas about climate action that were both practical and ambitious, demonstrating how community organizing skills could be applied to global challenges. During the formal portion of the reception, Catherine addressed the gathered group, reflecting on how much the initiative had taught her about British communities. She spoke about the privilege of witnessing so many examples of ordinary people doing extraordinary things for their neighbors. She emphasized that the royal family's role was simply to shine light on work that was already happening, not to create or direct community spirit. The most moving moment came when Margaret stepped forward to present Catherine and William with a special gift from all the Community Champions recipients. It was a beautifully bound book containing photographs and stories from every program that had been recognized or supported through the initiative. Each page showed real people whose lives had been touched by community kindness, creating a visual record of the widespread impact of grassroots organizing. As Catherine flipped through the book, she saw faces that had become familiar over the year of visits. There was Lucy from Cornwall, now confidently leading marine conservation workshops. Tommy, Margaret's great-grandson, had grown taller and was helping coordinate children's activities at the Yorkshire tea gatherings. Veterans from James's program were pictured at job fairs, graduations, and family celebrations, showing how support networks had helped them build stable, fulfilling lives. The book also contained letters from people whose lives had been changed by programs they had never personally visited. Teachers wrote about students who had gained confidence through community involvement. Parents described how neighborhood support networks had helped them through difficult periods. Elderly residents shared stories about newfound friendships and purposes that had enriched their later years. William spoke about how the initiative had changed his understanding of royal public service. Rather than simply attending events and cutting ribbons, they had learned to listen first and support second. The most successful royal engagements, he realized, were those that helped communities achieve their own goals rather than imposing external priorities. The reception concluded with the announcement of plans for the following year's Community Champions Awards. The program would expand to include international exchange opportunities, allowing British community organizers to share experiences with similar programs in other countries. There would also be new categories recognizing environmental sustainability, digital inclusion, and intergenerational programs. As the guests gradually departed, many exchanged contact information and made plans for future collaborations. The reception had achieved something that formal conferences often failed to accomplish. It had created genuine connections between people doing similar work in different parts of the country. That evening, as Catherine and William reviewed the day with their staff, they discussed how the initiative had evolved beyond their original vision, while staying true to its core purpose. What had started as simple recognition for community volunteers had become an ongoing support system that helped strengthen civil society across Britain. The success had attracted attention from other royal families, government officials, and nonprofit organizations interested in replicating the model. However, William and Catherine were careful to emphasize that the initiative's effectiveness came from its responsiveness to what communities actually needed, rather than from any particular royal involvement. Late that night, Catherine placed the gift book from the Community Champions recipients on her bedside table. She knew it would become one of her most treasured possessions, representing not just a successful royal program, but a year of genuine human connections that had enriched her understanding of service, community, and the quiet heroism that existed in neighborhoods across Britain. The initiative continued to grow and evolve, but its foundation remained the simple recognition that extraordinary kindness was happening everywhere, waiting to be noticed, celebrated, and supported. The royal couple had learned that their most important role was not to lead these efforts, but to ensure they were seen and valued by the wider society they served.